The Illuminate Arts and Faith Conference in Chattanooga, Tennessee wants to help you find your tribe. Do you get way too excited about quoting Wendell Berry or C.S. Lewis in conversations with coworkers? Does your Spotify playlist include hymns, a little jazz, and a whole lot of Andrew Peterson? Join your tribe at Illuminate March 31 and April 1 for education and inspiration from speakers Russ Ramsey, Douglas McKelvey, John Hendricks, and others. Find a complete list of session topics and ticket information at southern.edu/illuminate.
In 2024, I set out to meet as many poets as I could and spend an hour with each one. I got more than I bargained for, more insight, more clarity, more hope. It's proved to be one of the richest highlights of my life. 17 writers, 17 deeply human conversations that made me sit up and pay attention. Franz Kafka once said, if the book we're reading doesn't wake us up with a blow to the head, what are we reading for? A book must be the axe for the frozen sea within us. And that's what I hope this new book will do. I hope it wakes us up, my friends. I hope these conversations will be the catalyst for something to be reawakened, re-enchanted, and reinvigorated. It's called An Axe for the Frozen Sea, Conversations with Poets About What Matters Most. I'm Ben Palpin, and I hope you'll come and listen in as I spend a little time with poets like Lucy Shaw, Malcolm Guite, Dana Gioia, and Lee Young Lee. Pull up a chair at the table as we dig into what it means to write well and to live well. An Axe for the Frozen Sea is now available from Rabbit Room Press. Visit the store at rabbitroom.com, or better yet, ask about it at your favorite bookseller.
The awesome invitation I think that we have is like that we don't just sit there doing nothing while God does everything. I think that maybe the fun part in it all is that we get to also be like co-creators, and we get to do some of the writing. Even if there's like a hand that's leading us, I think somehow like our hand is in the mix too.
Welcome to the Habit Podcast, conversations with writers about writing. I'm Jonathan Rogers, your host. If you've heard this podcast, you've heard the music of singer-songwriter Taylor Leonhardt. In fact, you're hearing it right now. Her 2017 album, River House, is one of my very favorites. Her new album is Hold Still. It releases in September 2021. Taylor Leonhardt, I'm so glad that you are on the Habit Podcast today. Of course, you're on the Habit Podcast every week because your song, Diamonds, is the theme song. The instrumental part of that is the theme music for this podcast.
That's so awesome. Well, I love being with you guys every week. It's fun to be here in an even more up close way.
Yeah.
So thanks for having me.
Well, by the way, I love that song. When Drew Miller suggested that we use your Diamonds for the theme music for this podcast, I was amazed because of all the songs in all the albums in all the world. That was the one I was thinking about too. And so I was amazed.
That's so cool.
I just love that
song. Oh,
You're
thank
Not
you.
An Afterthought, Love Himself, Dreamed You Up. That's so good.
Man, I still need, that's one of those songs where when I sing it, it's like for people live, I think, oh gosh, I still am like living my way into this one,
Yeah.
Like it's still working on me. So,
so when you were writing, do you remember anything about, it's been a while since you wrote that song.
Yeah.
What do you remember about where that idea came from, that Love Himself dreamed you up?
Yes. Okay. Well, as you might discover today, my best ideas often are not mine, not originally. But I think that spark of that song came from, I had been reading a Brennan Manning book called The Signature of Jesus.
Uh-huh.
And he talks about, he says, like Christ is Logos, the Word of God.
Mm-hmm.
And by our very nature, we're sort of the little brothers and sisters of Jesus. And so if he's the capital W, Word of God, we're echoes, almost like these lowercase W, little words of God. And he talks about what a word is. And if you wanted to know what I was thinking, the best way I could tell you what I'm thinking is to use a word to tell you. And so he just says, so it was a really revolutionary idea. I remember reading that and going, oh, like our existence, each one of us, is a way that we can know something of the mind and the heart of God. That's really beautiful.
Yeah.
To me. And really it's just like, if I'm defining myself by like, I am what I do, or I am, I am defining myself by how much people like me or respect me, or all these different measures that we have. And I thought, what a much more beautiful thing to be measured by, that we would be actually like reflecting something of who God is.
Yeah.
Kind of making the picture complete sort of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When I first heard that song, I thought about something that Joseph Pieper said, and I'm sure he was summarizing something that Thomas Aquinas said, which is we can think about the world because the world was thought first, right? That the world starts with, the world was thought up by God and came into being, and that's why we, from our end, can think about how does it go. And again, I never know whether I'm paraphrasing Pieper or paraphrasing Aquinas, or paraphrasing Pieper, paraphrasing Aquinas, but we can think about the world because it exists, but then things exist because God thought them. And so the world becomes the meeting point of God's thought and our thought, which I think is, this is of course a podcast about writing. And I think that idea is relevant to a writer, although I'm not ready to sort out all the ideas about that.
Oh, of course.
Your turn. You can sort it all out.
I'll just sort out that deep theological thing. But I think you're right. I think there's something about, and maybe whether or not a writer's aware of it or not, I think when we've all had these experiences of kind of they just, to be honest, they feel kind of like mystical. Like sometimes these writing experiences you have, you're like, I don't know where that song came from. It's almost as if there's a sense sometimes of like, I feel like I downloaded it, or like somehow I opened up this little, like the heavens, if they were opened up, and it just like, I kind of was there to catch this song. And not every song feels that way. Sometimes it's much more of like, you labor over it and you're kind of fussing over it. But I think there are some, Diamonds may have been one of those. There's a song on my upcoming album called Poetry that felt that way. It just felt as if like, oh, I better pay attention, because I almost feel like something's being handed to me. And I don't know, maybe that is like, in a sense, the writer tapping into that, thinking about the world, but as like an access point to God who thought up the world. I love that. Yeah. I'm not sure exactly how to draw that map either, but I think that's worth kind of scratching at there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that song Poetry touched on some of the same ideas as Diamonds, right? I mean, you're God's poetry, and he doesn't waste a word. I hope I'm quoting that right. I'm at least paraphrasing if I'm not quoting.
Yeah.
You are God's poetry. He doesn't waste a word. And so as you mentioned in something I was reading, that song, as you realize that song was being given to you, that's kind of what kicked off the process of you writing this whole new album, which I just learned is called Hold Still.
It's called Hold Still. Yeah, I'll have to, I'm going to send you I just got the masters. So it's like,
excellent.
It's been a long process. It's been over a 2-year journey of making this album, but it started, I would say, with writing that song. I had Diamonds was on a project called River House that actually my now bandmate Jess Ray produced, and that had come out some years ago. And I think I'd spent the last couple of years playing a lot of house shows and sort of spending time with people. And also in that time, I went from being in my late 20s to now my like early mid 30s. And I think like this thing has happened where as I've gotten older and just lived more life and walked more years with God and people, I think my experience of the world has widened and deepened in the sense that it's a lot. River House was very much to me an album sort of about the friendship of God, the sweetness of God, kind of like discovering this. I don't know, like really an intimate friendship there. And then I think in the last years, just a lot of people I love have, including myself too, I think have walked through some really hard things. And I've started now to face just things I never really thought, like as a kid, like I never really thought when I like signed up to follow Jesus, like, oh, it's going to mean this and it's going to mean suffering. And it's like, life is not going to look how I think. And so I think just honestly, being exposed to more and more of the pain and sort of unanswerable things in the world is where this record kind of comes from, more innocence. And poetry really was the start of that. I think really coming to me in a time where I felt like, if I don't know how many of you guys are poetry fans out there, but I'm very much a poetry reader. It's a big part of my life. And so much of like what makes a poem, one of the things that makes a poem interesting is space, and the way the words are spaced out. And I think often if I could sort of pinpoint, here's where I am in my life, I think sometimes I feel like I'm in the space between words. And I think I was in that kind of place. I think I was feeling like, I don't even know what word, if my life was a poem, I don't know what word I'm even on, but I'm trusting. Like I heard this amazing man, Steve Breedlove, preach on Ephesians chapter 2. And he had said, we are God's poema. Like, some of the translations there are like, we're God's workmanship, or like, we're God's masterpiece. But he introduced me to that idea of like, what would that mean if you were like the poetry of God? And I started to imagine God as an artist, as someone who is maybe, standing back from the canvas or over the blank page, and kind of like, in that one. So like if I'm in that space between words, almost imagining like, okay, but God is making something beautiful out of my life. So can I trust him? Can I trust him with the word I'm on? Can I trust him with the word that's coming? And I think that has been a helpful image for me. And then I right around that same time, I found this prayer, this like Ignatian prayer that we talked about earlier, but by a man named, ready, he has a French name, and I'm always worried that I'm saying it wrong, but it's like Teilhard de Chardin. Teilhard? Uh-huh. See, this is great. I feel like I should have asked you before. So we're going to teach everybody how to say it. So it's Teilhard
de Chardin, right?
De Chardin. There you go. French priest. Amazing. And to this prayer that
paleontologist.
And a paleontologist, which that was a more recent discovery to me. And I thought, well, of course, like he would know a lot better than most of us what slow really means, slow processes. So, but his prayer starts, above all, trust in the slow work of God. And I think that it's a beautiful prayer. I would really encourage anyone listening to look that up. But
Well,
you can just search that phrase even.
Do you have it readily available?
I do. We could read it. Yeah, I'll read it. Okay, here we go. Above all, trust in the slow work of God. We are quite naturally impatient in everything to reach the end without delay. We should like to skip the intermediate stages. We're impatient of being on the way to something unknown, something new. And yet it is the law of all progress that it is made by passing through some stages of instability, and that it may take a very long time. And so I think it is with you. Your ideas mature gradually. Let them grow. Let them shape themselves without undue haste. Don't try to force them on as though you could be today what time, that is to say, grace and circumstances acting on your own goodwill will make of you tomorrow. Only God could say what this new spirit gradually forming within you will be. Give our Lord the benefit of believing that his hand is leading you, and accept the anxiety of feeling yourself in suspense and incomplete.
Wow. Is that something you go to every day?
I think it was almost something that became like when I first discovered it, I read it. So I printed it out and had it in my room, kind of over my desk. And it became something that I don't know that I could just, I don't know that I have it memorized to the point where I could read every word without looking at it, but I certainly have lines and phrases that have kind of just embedded themselves, I feel like, in my story, and kind of like etched themselves like on my heart, I feel like. And one of those being give our Lord the benefit of believing his hand is leading you, and accept the anxiety of feeling yourself in suspense and incomplete. That last line, I think that if there was sort of like, if this next record had a subtitle, I might call it In Suspense and Incomplete. I think it's just, it feels like maybe, feels like I really felt the invitation with these new songs to like be a little bit more honest maybe, and a little bit more exposed of like, here are some places I think I'm still working out, and some relationships I still feel stuck in, or there's pain in. I think it just was a little bit more of like a I would say vulnerable kind of look into I guess what life has looked like for me. And I imagine I would hope people can find their story in some of that too. But it's sort of like, okay, after I've kind of I've believed, I've believed these things about who God is. And I've, now it's almost like we're in the dark night of the soul. We're in the sort of like in between place. We're in the space between words where it's like, we're having to kind of feel our way through a little bit. And like the place where all these things I believed about who God is are now like, I'm kind of confronting them in my real life. Like, do I really think you're good? Do I really think you're here? And I think that it's just what I hear more in this, this batch of songs is kind of more of like a wrestling through things, and an accepting in myself some of the places where I have a long way to go.
Yeah. I think there's so many ways that we have to, make ourselves feel like maybe we're not in suspense and incomplete. We make sure we've saved enough money or whatever, there's so many different ways. And also, I think some of the ways people talk about writing is sometimes, your ideas are going to be kind of fuzzy, but when you write them, they won't be so fuzzy, which is true, by the way. You do get clarity from writing, and that's true. And yet I think there's some real benefit to the creative process by embracing the fact that we are in suspense and incomplete. And also, by the way, that's a comfort.
That's right.
I'm really glad that the state I'm in now is a state of suspense and incompleteness, and not, this is not the best I can hope for. Yeah.
And I think, there's a cool thing that happens, and maybe as a writer, you get a little glimpse of that, but just that, the awesome invitation I think that we have is like that we also aren't just like these passive, we don't just sit back and kind of like, sit there doing nothing while God does everything. I think that's like maybe the fun part in it all, is that we get to also be like co-creators.
Yeah.
And we get to do some of the writing. Even if there's like a hand that's leading us, there's still also, I think somehow like our hand is in the mix too. And just kind of like, it's this weird dance kind of, I guess, that we just do with the Spirit of God, where it's like, you're working on me, you're shaping me, you're leading me, but also you're really asking me to show up to my life and to my faith and to my relationships. And like, you've given, I have that sometimes, like, it overwhelms me, the sense of like what God has trusted me with, the work, the people, I can't believe it sometimes. So it's like, well, I'm glad you're here, and I need some help with this. So yeah, I think that is, there is just there's a lot of platitudes, I think, that you hear, especially if you spent any time kind of in the Southern church, and anything from like, well, just like let go and let God, or like this kind of stuff. And I think that's half of it. And then also, and so I think just finding those places where, just where it's like, it's trust and letting go, and also showing up. And I think on any, maybe on my best days, I can strike some kind of balance, but usually I'm erring on one side or another.
Yeah, because you started this conversation talking about the idea of finding, this thing, the sky's opening and you finding this song, or
sure.
But again, it's kind of like I ran across something that Tom Waits said about finding these songs sort of appear to you, and if you don't write them down, they're going to go somewhere else. So I mean, that's one way of. That may not be a complete. I don't think that's a complete way of thinking about the process, but it's an important part of it to think. It's not just that these things appear; it's that you also have to capture them before they go somewhere else.
I think the way I've always thought about songwriting, and really maybe just writing in general, because I actually enjoy a good amount of, or I should say, something I've enjoyed the last couple of years is getting into more writing that's not songwriting. And I think what's so fun about any sort of like writing that I've done is that I almost never have a sense of like I'm creating something that has never been said, or I think if anything, I maybe like imagine someone who's like I don't know if you have anything that you like kind of collect a lot of, but I started collecting these like triangle shaped rocks. Okay. And so like if I'm like on a walk in the woods, I'm like looking for a rock that's kind of makes like a perfect triangle. It's just this like silly little thing. But I think about sometimes writing being like you're in a sense you're a collector, because you're kind of moving around your life. So what you're reading, who you're talking to, all these things you're taking in can become part of what you might thread together and make later. So, writing poetry was a good example of that, where I almost never remember sermons. Like they just don't stick in my head very well. And that probably says a lot about me, Anna. should be better, but I almost never remember them. I remember this one. It like lived in my heart. And then I found, this prayer by Teilhard, and it's like the two things all of a sudden were like, oh, this is like the story. It's like, as soon as I found that, I knew it was like, I remembered the poetry thing. And then I felt like, okay, so now I'm stringing these things together. And I guess I have a sense of that, like walking around the world, like, almost like God, or, is leaving you these really fun breadcrumbs to like, maybe breadcrumbs are even the wrong thing, but just the sense of like God is leaving these little treasures for whoever will pay attention.
Yeah.
And then that's the fun part, is he's like, I wonder how, and I almost feel like God must have this curiosity, like, I wonder how they're gonna put this together. There's a proverb, you may know the reference because I don't think I can remember, but it's like, it's something, oh man, I'm gonna have to look it up, but it's
God's pleasure to hide things and the king's pleasure to find things out.
You got it. See, I knew you were gonna know that. Okay, yes. And it's like, it's the glory of kings to search out like these things that God has hidden. And that's like been one of those little things that's always stayed with me too, is I want to be someone who's like seeking out the stuff that's hidden in the world that no one else is maybe looking at.
And I think it's also this may be the point you're making in the first place, but for you, what you're looking for is triangle shaped rocks. And so that's what you see when you go walk in the woods. And I might be looking for shed snake skins. I don't know, and so our particular interests, our particular vision shapes what we see. And so if you and I were to go for a walk, the same place, we collect different things, and our collage, our elementary school collage we make out of our stuff would look very different even though we came to the same place.
Oh, I think that's so good. And I think that's almost making me think like that would be a cool creative practice for any sort of, makers out there. Which I think a lot of people more people fit in that category than sometimes
absolutely
they're even aware of. And I have a lot of friends who wouldn't tell you that they're artists, but I'm like, oh no, but you are, like the way that you are in the world. But that would be a fun, almost like spiritual creative practice, is to like maybe like even have something in mind, like, okay, I'm gonna look for this, or I'm gonna look for things that I don't know, I'm gonna look for feathers, or I'm gonna look for birds, or and just pay attention to like how many more of those you see. Because I also recently this year have gotten a little bit more into birding. I used to say bird watching, and then someone told me that it's like, no, real bird people say birding, not bird watching. So I didn't even know. But so birding, and I'm very new. I like just got this app on my phone. I'm trying to learn some of the just basic things about birds in Tennessee now that I'm a Tennessee resident. And but it's so funny because I would tell you now, like, there's more birds in the world than there ever have been. But I think I'm paying attention to them. I'm like looking for them. And so all of a sudden I'm like, oh my gosh, they're everywhere. They're like, but it is a beautiful thing to kind of like, I don't know. It invites an openness, I think. It's a different kind of way to walk around when you're sort of looking and listening.
Yeah. Have you ever noticed inflection points in your life or in your creative life where you realize, this time last year I was looking for blank and now I'm looking for something else? I find my interest in some truth about the world will catch my attention. Yeah. And for 18 months, everything I see seems to be relevant to that. And then some other truth feels more important to me. I mean, I guess it's kind of what you said a minute ago about this, your previous record was about the sweetness of God. And this most recent record, Hold Still, is about the how you deal with the hard things in life. Yes.
Yeah. I think that's really true. And sometimes it's even certain words, like a word that's feeling pretty I don't know, a word that's, I guess I want to use the word sticky to describe what I'm like, a word that's kind of sticking to me. Like I notice it, it's standing out is the word witness. You know, I feel like it's coming up, or I'll notice people saying it, or I'm reading this book. This is Consolations by David White, which is like, it's almost like a glossary. But he uses the word witness in one of his descriptions of friendship. And then of course, witness is a really important word in one of my favorite novels that I read this year called Peace Like a River. Mm-hmm. And he talks about kind of like, it's not my job to tell you here's me paraphrasing Leafinger. Since we're all doing a lot of paraphrasing today, but he says, it's not my job to tell you what to think, but I can only tell you what I saw. Like here's what I saw, make of it what you will. And I think that's feeling like something I'm noticing more of is people who I had an interesting conversation with our friend Sandra McCracken about this, about like thinking about songs that don't tell me what to think about God, but show me something. You know, like almost like I can't tell you really how to believe or how to live or whatever, but I can tell you what I've seen, and then
you give an account.
And then yes, I can give an account, and then you can decide, what to do with that or not. And I think that, so that word witness of like, I don't know, even as I'm talking about birding and all these different things, I feel like that's a word that is sticking out to me of just like almost it's almost like a role I'm wanting to step into more of.
Rachel Pye Jones was on this podcast earlier this year, maybe last year, and she has lived in the Horn of Africa for decades. And
amazing!
And her book is called Pillars, and it's about the idea of how do the pillars of Islam, if we took those seriously as Christian people, what would it alms and prayer and how might that change our spiritual practice? But she talks about this idea of witnessing, not just, hey, I'm a Christian person and I'm going to witness to you about here's what the Christian message says, person who's not a Christian, but rather I'm witnessing the world as a person who sees with the eyes of Christ. And what do I see? And that witnessing is not just, I mean, in Sunday school, we always talk about witnessing as if you're standing on the witness stand saying, well, here world, here's some things about Jesus. But I thought it was very transformative to think it's also our job to look out on the world with the eyes of Christ and see what we see.
Yes.
And I think that's really important.
Yeah, because there's something unfolding right here. And I do love that we're not just, it's not just about telling an old story, although that may be part of it, but it's also about seeing how that very true story is playing out in the world today. Yeah. And I think that's what, that's what I just personally am so hungry for, is to know, okay, God, I think I am discovering how hard it is to be a person of faith. And, like Jesus pretty much said, this is not going to be very easy, guys. So just buckle up. But I'm like, like, I think one of the things that it's funny because there are a lot of songs kind of about the promises of God. And I think about like a lot of songs you sing in church kind of about maybe some of the sweeter promises. And I often think about like, do you know something that Jesus promised very often was like just the trouble and the, like, that was a guarantee really. And so I think that, there is like a hardness to that. And I think maybe that's what I was kind of saying earlier is like, I think I'm realizing like how serious he was about that. Like, this is just not, this is going to require a lot of you, not just to be a Christian or a churchgoer or something, but to just like survive this world. And it will require a great deal of your heart and your faith and your patience. And I think that is sort of like what I was realizing, like that he really meant that. And so what does that look like? And how does God show up in that? And I think I'm so grateful for like the friendship that I've had with people who have walked really difficult journeys like ahead of me. And because I think I see people who like have been to some just unimaginable places and, you know, find God in them, like find God kind of in the, where you thought he would never be.
Yeah. You and I, before we started recording, we're talking a little about Thomas McKenzie, and he said, the culture that we live in tells us that life is about acquiring more, about getting better and faster and smarter and greater. It's about becoming bigger and more powerful. But the Christian faith tells us that human life is about a cycle of suffering, death, and resurrection. And I think that's so helpful to think about, you know, again, with regard to our expectations for the life we're going to be living. And also in terms of storytelling, that cycle of suffering and death and resurrection is makes for a pretty interesting story and a compelling story, and even more so than the story of going from strength to strength, from glory to glory, from triumph to triumph. You know.
Yeah, and it's just like there's no way to skip the hard part. And man, if there was anyone who wanted to skip the hard part, it's me. I would so like to, and I wish we all could. But it's like I don't think we can fully experience the resurrection. You know, we get like without sharing in the suffering. And so I think, man, if there was maybe like a message in the album, which I don't even mean like, here's the thing I'm trying to tell you because I know it so well, but I think it's like, if there's something even the title, I think why I called it Hold Still is like an exhortation to my own self, or like a challenge to my own self to like, can you just like hang on, like sit in the suspense, sit in the incompleteness and the pain and the suffering and I don't know how I will ever get through this, or I don't know where the world is headed, or the discomfort of that. Can you sit in it long enough to experience like the love, the power, the peace, the resurrection that I do think like God almost saves for those moments. It's like the people who will wait in that, like, and sit in that, like, then get to discover this like crazy, beautiful truth about the world.
Yes and amen.
Yeah.
All right, Taylor, you may or may not know this. I end these episodes with a question: who are the writers who make you want to write? And you have already mentioned that you read a lot of poets. Who are the poets who make you want to sit down and?
Ooh, yeah. Well, it all started for me with Mary Oliver, who writes a lot about nature and God, and in a voice that really, she's a great person if you're new to poetry, I would say. Just what a really special presence she was in this world and continues to be through her words. David White, I mentioned earlier, he's another one who I enjoy. That's like Whyte. And then I also have this year, I got into, in the early pandemic, I did this like poetry reading on Instagram live, which was super fun. And I just needed something to honestly like keep me tethered to people as we were all isolated. So I would read a poem every night before bed. And it was fun because I honestly like very quickly ran out of people that I already knew. So I had to like look for more, and found the poetry of Christian Wyman.
Oh, yeah.
Oh my gosh, Christian Wyman, really incredible. He has one called "I Don't Want to Be a Spice Store." That's probably my
I don't want to be
favorite.
a spy store.
Spice store. Like, I don't want to be a spice store. Really interesting title. But yeah. So those are three people who really make me want to write. Mary, David, Christian Wyman. I'm leaving out so many I know, which is always true, but
That's
yeah.
No, that's how the structure of the question is. What are the ones that come to mind? Not
Oh yeah.
Can you think? Not list your 20 favorites.
Not how many people could you possibly think of? Yeah.
Yeah, right. Well, great. Well, I think when this episode releases, your new album will not quite be out, but if this episode is more than a couple of weeks old when you listen to it, Hold Still should be out there and ready for you to.
Hold Still is coming September 17th. I'm super excited. And there are a few singles out already. Happy or Whatever, Mother's Daughter Poetry, and August 27th, The Bridge comes out. So you can listen to a good chunk of it. And then, the rest of the album's coming really soon. And I'll be doing some house shows and stuff like that this fall. So hopefully I'll get to meet some of you who are listening. If I don't know you already, excited to just be with you this fall and sing some of these songs live. It's going to be great.
Great. Thanks, Taylor.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. Thanks for having me.
Yes, it's fun.
This podcast is brought to you by The Rabbit Room, where art nourishes community and community nourishes art. And all our podcasts are made possible by the generous support of our members. To learn more about us, visit rabbitroom.com, and to become a member, rabbitroom.com/donate. Special thanks as well to Taylor Leonhardt for letting us use her song Diamonds as the theme music for Season 3 of the Habit Podcast. You can learn more about Taylor and follow her work at taylorleonhardt.com.
The Habit membership is a library of resources for writers by me, Jonathan Rogers. More importantly, The Habit is a hub of community where like-minded writers gather to discuss their work and give each other a little more courage. Find out more at thehabit.co.
If you've enjoyed this podcast episode, consider joining the Rabbit Room membership. Your membership helps sustain this community, funding everything from publishing and podcasts and theater productions to events and programs that support artists who create with a Christ-centered vision. We'd love to have you on board. Learn more at rabbitroom.com/member.